This is a presentation tonight. It's a partnership between, we have Sheryl from the State of Washington Department of Health, and we have Jay from Aspect Consulting. And we have Isaac and Mike, who are our local water gurus. And this is a partnership with the Lummi Island Heritage Trust. It's a citizen science project. And we are really excited to launch it and hope that you will be interested in participating more with it. We're really hoping that we can generate some data out of this program and have the data that we can use to explore grants and launch some pilot programs so we can continue to monitor our groundwater and take steps to protect it in all the ways that we can. So it feels like a really important and timely and exciting thing to have you all here, and I'm really glad you joined us. So thanks.
Thank you, Susan. And back in 1978, Dr. Roland Schmidt from the Western Washington University wrote The Water Resources of Northern Lummi Island. And all through this presentation, we're talking about Northern Lummi Island, that area north of Sunrise. There's a fault line there, and south of there is a very large rock called Lummi Mountain. It's completely different and gets its water from surface runoff than the north half. So we're talking about Northern Lummi Island, where all the wells are drilled, and actually most of the people live. I don't want to diminish Scenic Estates population by any means, but we're mostly talking about water wells in this presentation. So Dr. Schmidt said that the proximity of salt water makes the island groundwater resources among the most fragile and sensitive systems in nature. And I kind of pondered that, and I went, wow, that's really a statement. And he backs it up in his report. Good for him. He uses phrases such as fresh water is leaking out. We'll explain that in a later slide, but he gives a good overview of how the water cycle works and how when it rains, the trees take up some of that moisture. A lot of it evaporates. A lot of it runs off into streams and back into salt water very quickly. And only about 6% starts to percolate down into the ground. So of all of our annual rainfall, we only see a couple of inches of it that actually recharge our aquifer. So in 1978, he made three observations to finish out his report. Number one, back almost 50 years ago, he said, with wise usage, we could use groundwater indefinitely as our sole source of water. That's encouraging. He also said that the complexity of Northern Lummi Island will require some management in the future. And that is something that we want to talk about also. And the last one was how we develop is important. Whether or not we develop with seawater intrusion in mind, whether we develop with maintaining our septic systems, because they all provide to this very sensitive balance of nature under our feet. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Isaac. He's going to talk about groundwater studies, 1994. Hello, Isaac.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, 1994, the Lummi Island Groundwater Study, which is very interesting to me because it had a grassroots beginning. And wanted to thank Elizabeth Kalinowski and Bert Rubash, who, among others, were part of a groundwater committee and sort of got things moving. It was part of the Lummi Island Community Club at the time, now LICA. And this study was funded by the Department of Ecology, but it was a cooperation with the County Health Department, the State Department of Health, the County Department of Health, DOE, and locals here on the island. It's also an interesting one because part of this grant project brought Sue Blake in, who wrote a series of 9 articles for the Tome, which were called Water Watchers. And Mike and I sort of carried that title on with our project as we started to reawaken awareness of water issues on the island. And they had 2 public meetings back in 91 and 93. And during this study, they found that 12% of wells tested were medium to high risk of chlorides. And found some other studies. They studied tidal fluctuations, one groundwater quality, which was very interesting, did some very specific tests in certain wells to see, based on high tide, low tide, how those wells are being affected. And in this slide, you'll see a particular well. And we have this in the slide to show you, as we go forward with collecting well data, that you see an anonymized number there in bold, basically relating to the township area. And then this particular well had recordings pretty much monthly from 1991 through 93. And you see the well level, that's the static level. That's one of the things that's going to be part of this program. The conductivity, arsenic level, and chloride. Chloride also being something we're wanting to track with this Watersafe Challenge. So this is, we're trying to carry on a sort of model. And once we get perhaps into a future study, it'll probably be more intense like this. This is a good practice session, and it also gives us some really good awareness. So on back to you, Mike.
Okay. So I think a lot of us remember Bill Sullivan. He did his master's thesis in 2005. I actually participated in that with our well here that serves 12 lots in our small group B water system. And Bill made some a lot. He brought in 130 different well owners, whether they be water systems or private well owners. He did a good job of rounding up the troops and taking measurements, and he came up with this graphic that I still remember that talks about the aquifers, where we get our water from. And I think it's worth noting that the north half of Lummi Island is really a jumble of different geology, different time periods. If you look at that yellow area starting up at Migley Point, north end, that's all sandstone, predominantly sandstone. Sandstone has been sedimentary rock and laid down. Now, I'm not a geologist. I took a course in geology back before plate tectonics was acknowledged, so that's going way back. But look at the sandstone. The water trapped in sandstone is primarily in cracks and fissures. The rock doesn't leave a lot of spaces between things, and so they generally don't yield a lot of water, and you have to be sensitive to how you pump those. You move down the island, you see a bunch of greens and blues and that kind of light blue. Those are the remnants of about a mile of ice that used to cover Lummi Island about 12,000 years ago, and we're still rebounding from that massive weight over the top of us. And that caused a lot of glaciation, a lot of glacial till, a lot of pebbles, and and the jumble of that. These aquifers are defined differently, but they are interrelated. They don't transport water easily, let's say, into the sandstone or the greenstone. And then you get down around the southeast end of the study area, down around the auto preserve, and that's a green stone. That's produced by geologic forces, volcanic forces, and it's more of a under heat and under pressure, a little bit more dense. Again, more fissures to hold water. You can get wells out of it, but probably not as easily as tapping into one of these surface aquifers. So anyhow, that's your short course into geology of Lummi Island. Back to you, Isaac.
Great. And if Susan can do this, we have recreated a simple version of this map in Google Maps. So if you haven't noticed that already in some of our promotions, you can use this Google map and roughly see sort of what area you live in, how that compares to the aquifers that Bill Sullivan identified. Of course, as we know, time moves on, and as we get to 2006, this refined a lot of our understanding of aquifers as well. And to this day, we have found that some wells in the island have come up with a different apparent aquifer than was mapped. So the 2006 Northern Island Hydrogeologic Investigation. First off, I'd like to acknowledge Jay here. Jay is with Aspect Consulting, and although he wasn't involved with this study directly, we just really wanted to thank you, Jay, for joining us for this. And I'd love for you to interrupt me at any time at this point. But a couple of things that was interesting to me about this study was that they found seawater intrusion and naturally occurring arsenic were identified as the principal water quality concerns in northern Lummi Island. And I think that's pretty clear to everyone who has wells here. They sampled 40 wells, and they did this in April and August. Just a note that the Department of Ecology usually considers this a medium to high risk area. And so as part of your well permit, chloride sample in April and August is usually required, if not best practice. So in this program, we're doing chloride samples in September, in case that wasn't done already in August. And part of this education is just to encourage people to test for chlorides on those 2 months on a regular basis and submit them through a lab so that they can be recorded by the Department of Ecology. Now, very interestingly, the chloride concentrations in excess of background levels they identified as 40 parts per million. And that would be like, say, normal, not to be concerned too much with seawater or saltwater intrusion. Those were, see if you can guess with me which areas these would be. Point Migley, Village Point and Lane Spit, the Northwest Coast, and they said in the area of the Willows Inn, sort of roughly in that area, and the East Shoreline area between Centerview and Lego Bay Road. And that actually was probably most of the wells that had high to medium concentrations were in that East Shoreline area. Now, just to make things more interesting, and Jay, jump in here if you can hear me. They said it was really ambiguous. They said no relationships were identified between chloride levels and well depths or completion elevations, as in how tall, the elevation of the well or how deep it was drilled, indicating that freshwater and seawater relationship is more complex than models generally developed for uniform aquifer systems. So just like our population here, we're a jumble, we're mixed up, and we're hard to define. So that means that there's no solid answers, no black and white answer on why certain wells might have a higher chloride level or possibly be indicating seawater intrusion than others. They said methodologies for limiting seawater intrusion on northern Lummi Island must be adaptive to area-specific circumstances. So we really locally need to identify if your well is coming in with possible seawater intrusion. That might be a very local event. Jay, do you have any comments about any of this?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much spot on, Isaac, from my interpretation of the report. As you mentioned, I wasn't involved in the study directly, but yeah, I think it really gets back to what you guys touched on earlier, and just the mix of sand and gravel aquifers and bedrock aquifers on the island, and the interaction between the two creates a pretty complex system where it's hard to predict where these kind of high chloride areas are going to be, or high chloride wells are going to be located. But the map that you're showing here gives a pretty good graphical illustration of where where some of the higher concentrations were found, where the yellow and specifically the red dots on that map show areas of high chloride concentrations. You can see that a lot of the highest concentrations were near, closer to the coast, closer to water than inland, which is one thing you would expect from for chloride for seawater intrusion. But again, it is a complex system.
Thanks, Jay. So, by the way, these maps that we're showing you in some of the insets, all of these studies are available to download, usually as a PDF. And you can find those at the Heritage Trust website, liht.org/watersafe. And that link will also be available on the final slide. But yeah, the WaterSafe page on Heritage Trust has links to all these, and you can look at a larger version of this map if you want to see some of these locations. All right, Mike, back to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Isaac. Informative. Sheryl, would you like to jump in here and offer a state viewpoint in any of this so far?
No, I want to thank you so much for letting me participate and be here. I really appreciate that. I have had the opportunity to go through the aspects report, not dig through the data that supports it, but it looked like it was very well done, and you're fortunate that you have that as a basis to build on. And it's just seemed like an excellent report. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Sheryl. And looks like we're building some Q&A for after the presentation. Everybody will have a chance to jump in here and ask your questions, so be patient. Anyway, next slide. Percent of Lummi Island wells with elevated chloride levels. What's all this business of chlorides? Oh my goodness. Well, if we look at the studies going back to 1978, very few wells, but only one of them showed chloride levels. In 91 and 94, it was 10%. In 94, they included some of those wells that had elevated, the 100 part per million level. And then in 2005 and 6, if you look at the combined wells that are over 100 and the ones that are over 250, it looks as though those graphs are growing quite alarmingly, but in actuality, only 5 of 130 is less than in 91 and 94. I guess the only thing to draw from this is that too few studies over too long a period of time. And you see the big question mark over there on the right-hand side. And this is what the WaterSafe program is all about. It's been 16 years since we've tested our wells. We've added population to the island. Climate is changing about us, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So where are we? Should we be concerned, or should we be just fat, dumb, and happy? And if your well runs dry or gets contaminated, oh well. That's a bad pun. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that.
You're going to let me loose on puns. Okay. Another thing about this WaterSafe challenge is that we want to have a larger sample size, right? So even if you know that your well is doing great and you're not worried about seawater intrusion, we'd love to have you participate, because if we're only testing, fragile wells, it's going to throw the data off too.
So next slide. Let's talk about this chloride indicators and, greater than 100, greater than 250. EPA sets standards for maximum contaminant level of all sorts of things that should not be in your water at certain levels. And they set that contaminant level at 250 parts per million. Salt water is in the thousands, 20, 30,000 parts per million. So, but all of that salt and chloride is not healthy, and that's why they set that. You look at the graphic, that little red house with the well going down in it, kind of simplify that up. Before the house and the well, it was just a big blob of fresh water, kind of hovering near the shore, extending inland. And the top of the well of that fresh water was somewhere around sea level and extended down. And we had nice vegetation and trees and all kinds of wildlife, and life was good. We started building these red houses all over the place and drilling wells, and started sucking fresh water out of the ground. And there's a balance between the fresh water that's below us holding back the salt water, essentially leaking out. And that's what Dr. Schmidt was talking about when he said the fresh water leaks out and has to be replenished by infiltration, by the 2 inches of rain that we get. It's a balance. And we know that Lummi Island is a big jumble of rocks and gravel and sand and clays and all sorts of things. Some are tilted up and some are fractured, and good luck trying to figure it all out. So it's very dependent upon where you're at. I know everybody's looked at the maps and said, where do I live? I guess I'm okay. Or oops, maybe not. And it depends upon how many of those red houses have wells and septic systems, and how dense it is, and how much they're pumping. And that's the kind of stuff that we want to educate islanders on, how they can underpump their freshwater supply, where you don't get these cones of depression, where you likely start sucking air out of your well, or a cone of ascension, whereas you pump hard for long periods, you start to draw that salt water up into the intakes. And once it gets in there, it's really difficult to get it back out, because the tidal flows, it's all mixing, and dependent on how close to the shoreline you are. So the only thing to take away from this slide is we don't want to overpump our wells in singly or in combination. We want to test our individual wells for what are we actually pulling in. That's good information to know. There are other tests that we can do, conductivity and total dissolved solids, and there's tools in the toolbox if we avail ourselves of them. So Isaac, I'm going to throw it back to you to talk about forest, and welcome Scott Josiah to them. Hi, Scott.
Hey, hi, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for joining us. We're all very happy to have Scott on the island. He's a retired state forester for Nebraska and director of the Nebraska Forest Service, retired, and now chair of the board for the Lummi Island Heritage Trust. He's been a great resource to us. And Mike and I asked him for a quote when we were doing the series of Water Watchers articles about water infiltration, recharge of aquifers. And this was his quote. Scott, would you like to say a little something about the dynamics of we have deep forest areas on the island, that's great. But on the northern half of the island, a lot of it's, developed, it's forested, different kind of, what can people do in their own properties to help retain water?
So first, let me just back up a little bit and say that, before settlement, this entire island was essentially forested. And so we had very deep soils full of organic matter. The forests were old growth forests. So there was a lot of debris on the floor, organic debris, so forest floor. And so there was a lot of moisture that just was absorbed. It just infiltrated. There were probably very few floods on the island, very little runoff. It was probably at least rapid runoff during major events. Probably most of it just soaked in like a big sponge, like the quote says. But now we've changed things. We've changed things quite a lot. We've cleared a lot of the forest. The old growth is all gone. We've changed those soils and we've run machinery over them. We've compacted them. Even today, we have people buying 5-acre lots and removing half the trees. and running equipment over that and clearing it off for either housing or driveways or other impervious surfaces. In other words, a surface that cannot absorb any water at all, and it just runs off. And these kinds of impacts are having impacts on our aquifers. And we don't know really what kind of impacts those changes are having. With all that said, I think it's important for us, all of us, to think about our water when we do things to the land. And if we own some land, retain that forest if we can, or retain as much as as we can without disturbance, so that we're not disturbing the soils. If we have areas that have been disturbed, and it's a great thing to plant trees, obviously, to begin to restore that soil soil fertility and soil ability to infiltrate and absorb water, and then release it slowly, either to seeps and streams, temporary streams, or right to the aquifer. The statistic that Mike came up with earlier was that 6% of the water that comes from rainfall is infiltrated and goes back to the aquifer. That's largely through forests, and we better protect them if we want to keep our aquifers in good shape.
Thanks,
So,
Scott.
yep.
Yeah, so some terms to talk about: stormwater or runoff is water that is, we experienced, for example, last November, such a heavy rainstorm or a period of rain that you probably, if you were on the island, you noticed it just sheeting off. Here on the mountain where I live, it was very intense. And that's an example of, say, a more extreme winter. And models are talking about wetter winters. So even though we're getting more rainfall up here, perhaps in the future, if we're not protecting that and stopping or limiting the runoff, we're losing that water into the sea. So we want to do that. One of the most interesting things I found when studying this is that not only the trees sort of slow down the rain as it comes down. So rain's being caught in the leaves, it slowly rains down, so not everything comes down to the soil at one time. Mm-hmm. But the roots of trees and shrubs are causing infiltration channels, so that the water is not just sheeting off, but going down into our water table and down into our aquifers. So the way we landscape our properties here can really help recharge your well. All right, back to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Isaac. And also a big thank you to all of the islanders that take rainfall measurements religiously and submit them to the tome. For Elizabeth Kilinowski and Bert Rubash for assembling those in a database and sharing that with us. And Bert came up with, I thought, this pretty explanatory graph. If you look at University of Washington, the climate group there published No Time to Waste 2019, talking about coastal areas and changing climates. And I don't want to get off in a tangent of is it real or not, or circular, or whatever, but they predicted wetter winters, drier summers, and more rainfall. And our data for rainfall for Lummi Island is actually pretty short as climate data goes. We go back to 1980. Everybody here knows how to read a graph, and you can see the blue area, those months that stayed relatively steady in rainfall month to month. The orange area, summertime, looks to me like a little less rainfall over on the right side of the graph than the left side, but that's just me. Make up your own mind. And the winter months and the shoulder months to winter generally have seen an increase in the amount of rainfall. And that very top stacked bar is in 1980, we were seeing about 32 inches of rain on the island per year. And now we're steadily seeing more and more, up to about 36. Of course, that could change next year, and who knows. But anyway, our winters wetter. Are summers becoming drier? Are we getting more rainfall? There are consequences to climate change, and the Department of Ecology in Washington said that changes in our climate and sea level will likely affect coastal wells in ways that we don't know. I think those ways are probably all negative, but they need more study and more time. And that's what we want to do, is we want to study this stuff. It's been 16 years and we don't know where we're at. Next slide. So where are we at on this water budget? So the big number up on top, we get about 117 million gallons of aquifer recharge. It's the 6% that doesn't go out through the culvert and puddle in your driveway, and so about 117 million gallons a year of rainfall recharge into our aquifers on the north half of Lummi Island back in 2006. And I want to be clear, that's not the entire island, and it's not yesterday. Add to that, back in 2006, when there were quite a few less of us and we didn't have VRBOs and all of those visitors that come, we were contributing about 14 million additional gallons per year from our septic systems. Yes, a lot of that goes up, a lot of it stays, but also a lot of it goes straight down into the aquifer along with everything else. And if your septic system is not working properly, as it should, sending some stuff down there that you probably don't want to get back up through your well. Just saying. So there's a reason why we should inspect our septic systems once every 3 years. And I'll not dwell on that point, except to say there's, it's like the dipstick in your car. If you don't ever check your oil and you run out, shame on you. So get out there. If you haven't done it, you can take a course online through the county. Maybe a 1 hour of your time, learn how to do it yourself, and you're good to go. And you'll know that you have oil in your crankcase and you don't have too much sludge and scum in your septic tank. Okay, the sermon on septic is over. North Island consumed about 37 million gallons in 2006. So let's see, if I do my math right, we only consumed about a third of what was down there. And it's raining more, according to that last slide. So what's the problem, Mike? Well, the problem is we don't know. And the problem is it's very complex. Not all aquifers are created equal. Not all homes are clustered or spaced out evenly. So you really want to find out what your well is doing. That's the important thing, is your well. So that's end of that thought. I'll turn it back over to Isaac.
This presentation, notes, we're not really talking about your personal water conservation. There's a lot of resources out there to how to use less water within your household. This presentation is more about the big picture, about how we're all sharing our same groundwater source on northern Lummi Island, and how that macro relationship with water is affecting all of us. This is a map of just about all the water systems, the public water systems on the island. Now, Mike is the manager of the Ridge Water Association, and was a previous water operator. One of my mentors. Thank you, Mike. And I'm a contract operator. I operate at least 6 of these water systems and some other private wells on the island. We're giving you this context because there's basically 3 groups of water users on the island. You're either a member of or a customer of a Group A water system, which is 15 or more connections. An example of that would be Isle Air, or the condos. A Group B water system has fewer than 15 connections. So that might be like Mike's Ridge Water Association or Marine View Estates. And then the rest of that water on the northern half of the Lummi Island is wells, private wells. And so the interesting thing about this is Group A systems are regulated by the State Department of Health. Group B systems are regulated by the County Department of Health. And so are wells, roughly, lightly regulated. And all well systems are regulated when they're constructed by the Department of Ecology. So there's all sorts of relationships here with regulatory agencies. I'm happy to say that we've gotten great initial feedback from just about all the public water systems on the island. They're interested in participating in this program. And our big push is to have private well owners and managers participate in this well data, because as you can see all that blank spot on northern Lummi Island, there's a lot of residents out there and you're getting your water from your own well. This is essentially the breakdown of how the Watersafe Challenge, the basic simple data that we're wanting to collect. The first is to get well water static depth. Now that's basically the depth of the water in your well shaft when it's not been pumped. And we want to take that sample in September, next month, December, and March. The idea being that September, we know that that's sort of the end key of our drought period. And then beginning in December, we start to see recharge in that zone. And March is where, you know, we've had our winter and the aquifers should be reflecting, or at least the well levels should be reflecting a certain amount of recharge. We also want to collect a chloride lab sample in September. If you have happened to already do that in August, that works too. But a chloride lab sample will be a good indicator of saltwater intrusion. And we talked about those levels. And then optional information is total well depth. That is how deep the well was drilled, the elevation of your well, you know, what's the top of your well cap, and the well log, which is something like this. It's a form that was completed by the well drilling outfit that created your well. It's logged with the Department of Ecology, and it has a lot of this basic information on there. One of the things I want to reassure everyone, just like previous studies, is that all of this data will be anonymized so that when it's published, there's nothing that identifies your personal well. Although on our forms, we do have a little checkbox that will say, you know, are you interested in networking with local, your neighboring well owners? Because if you're interested in establishing a relationship with fellow neighbors who are drawing possibly from the same aquifer, you can work together. That's part of what Mike and I, with the Water Watchers, and again, continuing on the Watersafe Challenge, want to develop a sort of a community of water users, knowing that we're all pulling off the same resource. We are going to do a very cool workshop on Saturday. And what this is going to do is show you how to measure and inspect your well. It will require some equipment, but there's some resources on the island. And so if you're a do-it-yourself type person, you'll be enabled during this workshop to understand the safety issues and concerns and what to look for. We'll talk about how to pull a water sample and submit that to the lab. We'll have containers ready to go for that. So even if we want everyone to participate, but even if you're really not interested in participating, but you want to learn about your well, please come. It's going to be a great presentation. We're also going to talk about some of the things about how to protect the area around your well and what best practices are. So this will be an opportunity for, again, you to understand what the challenge is all about and find out how you want to participate, whether you want to do it yourself or it's possible to hire a professional to do it for you. So that is our presentation. I'm going to turn it back to Susan, But before that, I just wanted to ask Sheryl too. You've sort of had a glance at our island so far. Is there anything that you've noticed about the studies or our presentation that you'd like to express to our membership or our neighbors?
When I first met you, Isaac, I was just so impressed with you folks pulling this together and getting your community engaged to do this. One of the roles that I fill at the Department of Health is I sit on the Water Supply Availability Committee, which kind of monitors both snowpack and groundwater levels across the state. And we struggle with a lack of groundwater data, and tying into that is what I saw last year. And I'm sure you've all have heard these stories as well. And that heat dome that hit in June, we had reports of over 20 wells going dry. And these were private wells, Group B wells or Group A wells. And of course, in every situation, it was because they're not monitoring. And historically, that's been fine, especially on the west side. But we're just seeing as sister agencies trying to monitor this resource across the state that we really need more water level data on all levels, Group A levels, Group B, and private wells. So I was so excited to hear you guys were doing this and educating your citizenry on how to take the water level measurements and the value of it. And just been really impressed with your breadth of information today about the island as a whole. Especially appreciate Scott's contributions and Jay as well. It's you guys are unique. You're an island, and that has some inherent risks and challenges associated with it. But it also gives you exactly what you're doing, and that is pulling together everyone to work together for your overall benefit. So I just appreciate learning more about your island and sitting in and offering whatever support and resources we can. We're not here as a regulatory, I'm just here as technical assistance and providing whatever additional information that I can. I wish I could come up Saturday, it'd be fun. So I hope that wasn't too much or not what you're expecting, but I'm happy to answer any questions and listen some more. This has been excellent. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheryl.
Yeah, thank you, all of you. And if you have any questions, please add them to the chat. Do you have a question? How long does it take for rainwater to percolate down to our aquifers? Just going to throw that out there, and any of the panelists can answer that.
Jay, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know that I can answer the question. It really depends on how deep your well is. If it's completed in the glacial deposits, the sands or gravels, then it's not going to take very long for water to get down there. If it's in bedrock, it can be many years. So it's really dependent on what type of system your well is completed in and where you are on the island.
Yeah, if anything, we've learned that one size certainly does not fit all on Lummi Island in many respects. Bill Sager had a question. Bill's question was, let me see if I can bring it up. If we have had recent water tests done by a lab, would it help to provide this to someone? Absolutely, yes, Bill. This is the stuff we're looking for. If you would fill out that form that we'll have at the Auto Preserve next Saturday, or this coming Saturday rather. Yeah, all data is good data. And Dahl Netzel, your question was, is uncontaminated freshwater availability a determiner for home building on the island? If not, why not? Well, it certainly is a requirement that you have a water source approved or part of a water system as part of your building permit. That's one of the checkoff boxes. As a water manager, Isaac and I get those all the time. Somebody wants to build a house, building permit sends us a form, and we fill it out, and we say water availability is there. So that checks that off. I hope that answered it, Dahl. And let's see, Isaac, you want to take
a
couple of these?
Yeah, Dahl, that question about water availability is very interesting, because if you're building in an existing water system, they have a number of permitted connections that they can supply. And as long as, so say you're in Isle Air and you're building there, there's a certain amount that they have and so on. If you're buying property without a well, that's a different story. And you're going to want to be able to prove to the county that you have a freshwater supply. Wendy, thank you for asking that. We hope to be there Saturday, but if not, are there other options for learning to do measurements? So I will only be conducting the one class. However, there will be some printed information that we'll publish that can guide you through exactly what we want to measure for. And some of the points about especially measuring your well will be in that guidance. There's the well best practices is something I think is important information. I think in the future probably do another one just on general principle. So all I can say is if you can't make it Saturday, I might have some printed material for you. So go ahead and email that watersafe@liht.org there with your contact information if you want to get that.
I just want to jump in that this is something that we hope to continue offering, not just for this year, but in future years. That this is just the first foray into this program. So we will be doing other demonstrations. And there's also information on the Whatcom County website that tells private well owners how to measure their wells. And then we can make sure to send that information out as well.
I have there's more questions too.
Yeah. You want to take Janine Shaw's question, Isaac?
Yes. Janine, how will you make the data anonymous? Won't there be maps? I don't know that we're actually intending to publish a map as far as this goes. We're going to collect data sort of in township ranges. I think is sort of roughly what we were thinking about, Mike, sort of to cluster certain areas. But yeah, that would be a giveaway, wouldn't it, Janine? So yeah, this is mostly going to be presented as data. A certain amount of wells in this area have this level of chloride, and so on and so forth.
And just to underscore, there's no map that will be produced out of this data.
I'll just add one thing. We'll probably track the wells by township range section. That's a big area, and then subdivide it down to quarter. It's still, 15, 20, 30 wells clustered. It'd be hard to tell who's doing what, if that's your concern. Let's see. Alex Carlin asked, can you talk a little bit about arsenic? Yeah, it's bad for you. It used to be 50 parts per billion was that maximum contaminant level. The EPA changed that to 10 parts per billion that should be treated. And there are methods to treat for arsenic in water to make it safe to drink. And if your well water had arsenic in it, in 2014, the state deregulated a lot of these requirements for Group Bs. I think Isaac mentioned that earlier, so that the Group Bs can still produce water at the old standard 50, but our particular association, we treat for it, get it down below 10 and shoot for 0. So that's our goal. I hope that answers it. And Dave Parker asked, can EC be used as a proxy for chloride? I'm tempted to give this to Jay, put him on the spot again, or possibly Sheryl, because I'm not really sure what Dave is talking about EC.
Was that electrical conductivity?
I think so.
Potentially? No, not really. I mean, that would be a measure of all the constituents of a water. So to tease out just chloride from a measurement like that would be difficult unless the chloride levels were very high, in which case, yes, it could be used as a proxy for chloride. Chloride's in the range of 100 milligrams, maybe 200 milligrams per liter. It might be tough to see just based on a conductivity measurement, but it's possible that you would see it.
So we're coming up on 1 hour, and I promised everybody that we would be sensitive to the time. And we've got a couple of more questions here, 3, 4. So I think we can run through these. If you want to drop off, that would be fine. Let's go ahead with Dawn's. Is growth versus water availability monitored by any local agency? There's a comprehensive plan. There's a sub-area plan that calls for managing growth. There's a Growth Management Act in the state of Washington. And there's concern by private citizens about water versus monitoring and growth. And I think that's part of what's driving this discussion. Can we sustain it? Do we need to put protective measures in, like Dr. Schmidt said? Some protective measures might be required in certain areas. So, Isaac, you want to take Charles' question?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So group wells, or like public water systems, I think you're talking about there, they're required to have a water right. And that's taken into consideration with their system capacity, whether they can supply water to however many members or customers they have within that water system. And so the Department of Ecology is looking at that. The Department of Health is looking at that very closely to see if their well can supply that level of water, whatever they're asking for, in part of the bigger picture. Now, I'm going to stop talking now because we have Sheryl with us. Do you have more clarification on that?
Oh, I wish I did. That's that deep, dark world of water law and water rights. And it's so confusing. And I know we try and work with ecology, and then we do a review, of course, the plans to make sure that they do have the appropriate number of rights, but that's kind of outside of my lane. And so I'm just not as familiar with it as I'd like to be. Sorry.
Sure. You know, there's I hope that answers your question. But I have to admit, a lot of the answers about aquifers and how much water is available down there is a mystery to all of us. Yeah. It's, you know, so maybe someday the technology will be there. But so I can't emphasize enough how important monitoring is, to take that regular well depth level and occasionally to test what's called a drawdown, you know, where you pump your well for a while and see how low the water level gets before it stabilizes. These are kinds of tests that if we do cooperative tests in the same area, we can see what kind of impact a particular, you know, well might have on others. I see a question from an anonymous attendee on the well grouping slide. Group A's are regulated by the Department of Health. That's the State Department of Health. And then Group B is regulated by the County Department of Health. So in some cases on the island, because of, say, very high arsenic levels or such, the State Department has been involved with Group B systems as well. It's pretty rare. But yeah, Group B systems are regulated by the county. And in general, the less number of customers you have, Group A's get the most attention, and larger Group A's, which we don't even fathom here on the island. Our largest Group A on the island is Scenic Estates, and here we have, you know, 222 connections. That's so that's a very small system in the mainland world. So the attention on regulatory issues gets smaller and smaller as you get lighter and lighter, to the point where so private well, it's just like emergency preparedness. You know, it's your water, and you should be ready to protect your water supply by monitoring, by testing. Do you mind if I answer the next one too, Mike, on Doug. Hi, Doug.
Go for it.
Do we know the depth of the sandstone aquifer? And that's variable, but for example, where you live, there's a well log that shows that when that well was drilled, they can tell where that sandstone starts or where it appears. Again, that's going to vary based on where the well was drilled and if that is actually a sandstone aquifer or not. So the key to that question is to look at your well log. And that, interestingly, is public information available on the Department of Ecology's website. You can look that up by address or by name of the owner, and you can pull that up if you don't have that in your own records.
Very good. Let's see, what's the medium depth of wells for which we have data? I suppose I could take all the data and run a median on it, but it would be pretty worthless knowing that all the wells are, are you close to the shoreline? Are you inland? Are you in a sandstone or a greenstone? Are you in a glacial till? Is it a high one, a low one? It's all over the place. So this is a case where one answer certainly does not fit all. And that's why you're encouraging people to step up and find out what's in their neighborhood and maybe get to know their neighbors a little bit better on what they're doing. And when things go wrong, what can we do about it? Becca Retmer asked, will all the Class A and B wells be included in the study? And probably not, Becca. It's up to the individual water association if they wish to participate. We've gotten very good feedback from most of them that they are interested, but no firm commitments. We'll see. And we're 2 minutes over. Let's take Doug's last question.
More after that too.
Go ahead.
We also have, do we know if any aquifers are close to being overutilized?
No, we don't know that.
I'll tell you, I've heard some horror stories on the island, but they're locally based in that, if you just let your hose run in the end of September, you might run your well dry. That can happen. But that's the practice within that particular well. And I have never heard of a systemic issue of wells running dry or exactly how that question was phrased. But it is, that's part of this presentation is more about aquifers and our water source. But I encourage everyone to brush up on good water practices within your own household, because that's a direct impact on your own well that you can control. And again, one of the experiences we had with our deep freeze, going back to January, I believe it was that we had massive water breaks all over the island because people weren't expecting this kind of deep freeze, and came back and opened up their system, and wow, main breaks everywhere, private homes, public systems. So there's practices like when you shut your system down for the winter, how to winterize if you're leaving for a while. These are all good practices. I just want to encourage everyone to protect your own well supply.
I think the final question that I see is, do we know about any deeper aquifers that lie beneath the sandstone?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Everybody who participated in the event tonight, everybody who registered, we will be sending you a sign-up sheet that will allow you to participate. I'm going to go ahead and put in the email link or the web link that had all of the studies that we referred to earlier. And if you have any questions please feel free to send them to watersafe@liht.org, which I also just dropped in the chat. And thank you so much for participating. It was really great to have a community conversation about this. And thank you very much to our panelists for the excellent information and for fielding all these questions. And thank you especially to Sheryl and Jay for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Guys.
Fun to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.